The November wind cut through the streets of San Diego like a blade, carrying with it the salt of the Pacific and the distant hum of military jets overhead. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the Veterans Memorial Park, her hands buried deep in the pockets of her worn leather jacket, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. Around her, families gathered in clusters, children clutching small American flags, elderly veterans in dress uniforms adorned with medals that told stories of wars long past. She didn't want to be here. Every fiber of her being had screamed at her to stay home, to avoid this place where memories lurk like landmines waiting to detonate. But something, guilt, duty, or perhaps the ghost of a promise made 7 years ago, had pulled her from the safety of her small apartment in the Gaslamp Quarter and brought her to the ceremony honoring fallen Marines. The sky was overcast, heavy clouds hanging low as if the heavens themselves mourned. The Marine Corps flag snapped in the wind, the eagle, globe, and anchor insignia stark against the red and gold fabric. Sarah's eyes traced a monument before her, black granite etched with names, so many names. Her throat tightened as she scanned the letters, knowing she'd find him there. Corporal Daniel Hayes, row 17, third from the left. She'd been with him when he died. Not physically beside him in that final moment, but close enough to hear the explosion that tore through the convoy, close enough to see the smoke billowing into the Afghan sky, close enough to carry his last words for the rest of her life. Promise me, Mitchell. Promise me you'll find him. Tell him his dad loved him more than anything. Sarah had been a combat medic. 24 years old, idealistic enough to believe she could save everyone. Daniel Hayes had been her best friend in the unit, the guy who made everyone laugh during the long, tense patrols through Helmand Province, the Marine who showed her photos of his son every single night before lights out. A little boy with Daniel's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. Tommy, 5 years old in those photos, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a plastic toy soldier. The ceremony began with a bugler playing taps, the haunting notes drifting across the park. Sarah felt her chest constrict, her hands trembling slightly. She developed this tremor after coming home. Doctors call it a symptom of PTSD, a physical manifestation of trauma her mind couldn't quite process. On bad days, her whole body would shake. On good days, just her hands. Today was somewhere in between. A chaplain spoke about sacrifice, about honor, about the debt the nation owed to those who gave everything. Sarah barely heard the words. She was back in the desert, the taste of dust in her mouth, the weight of her med kit on her back, Daniel's blood on her hands as she tried desperately to reach him through the chaos and gunfire. She'd failed. By the time she got to him, he was gone, his eyes staring up at the merciless Afghan sun, his lips still forming words she couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears from blast. After the war, Sarah had come home to nothing. Her parents had died in a car accident while she was deployed. She'd gotten the news via a Red Cross message and hadn't been able to attend the funeral. No siblings, no close relatives. The Marine Corps had been her family, and when her contract ended, she'd left it all behind, unable to bear the weight of the uniform, the memories, the expectations. She'd tried to find Tommy Hayes. God knows she'd tried. But Daniel's ex-wife had moved, changed her name after the divorce, taken Tommy somewhere Sarah couldn't track. Every lead went cold. Every phone call went unanswered. Eventually, Sarah had convinced herself that maybe it was for the best. What would she even say to the kid? Your dad died trying to save his unit? Your dad's last thoughts were of you? How do you deliver that message to a child? So she'd buried it, just like she'd buried everything else from the war. She worked odd jobs, bartending, security, whatever kept the bills paid and her mind occupied. She avoided other veterans, avoided VA hospitals, avoided anything that might drag her back into that desert where pieces of her soul still wandered, lost. The ceremony continued. A Marine Corps color guard presented arms. Families stepped forward to lay flowers at the monument. Sarah watched a young widow with 2 small children place a bouquet of white roses beneath a name, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The image burned into Sarah's mind. Another reminder of the cost, the ripples of loss that extended far beyond the battlefield. She was about to leave, to slip away before the crowd dispersed and someone might recognize her, when she heard it. A child's voice, high and urgent, calling out somewhere behind her. That's her. Mom, that's her. Sarah turned instinctively, her combat training still sharp enough to react to unexpected sounds. Through the crowd, she saw a boy running toward her. He was maybe 12 or 13 now, tall for his age, wearing a dark blue hoodie and jeans. His green eyes were wide, shining with tears, and in that instant, Sarah's world tilted. Those eyes, Daniel's eyes. The boy reached her and without hesitation, threw his arms around her waist, hugging her with a desperate intensity that knocked the breath from her lungs. She stood frozen, her arms at her sides, her mind struggling to process what was happening. You came? The boy sobbed into her jacket. Dad said you would. He said you'd find me one day. Sarah's heart stopped. Her hands, trembling now for entirely different reasons, slowly came up to rest on the boy's shoulders. She looked down at the dark hair, the thin frame, and felt 7 years of buried grief come crashing through every wall she'd built. Tommy? Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse with emotion. The boy looked up at her, tears streaming down his cheeks, and nodded. He told me about you, before he left. He said if anything happened to him, Sergeant Mitchell would take care of me. He made me promise to remember your name. Around them, people had stopped to watch. Sarah was vaguely aware of a woman approaching, mid-30s, blonde, her face a mixture of resignation and something that looked like relief. Tommy's mother, the ex-wife Sarah had never been able to find. I'm sorry, the woman said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years. I know this must be... I'm Jennifer. Daniels, we were married when he deployed. Sarah couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. She looked down at Tommy, this boy who had been 5 in the photos and was now on the edge of adolescence, who had somehow carried his father's words all these years, who had recognized her in a crowd of hundreds. How did you... Sarah managed to force out the words. How did you know it was me? Tommy pulled back slightly, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. Dad, show me your picture. Lots of times. He said you were the bravest person he knew. He said you saved a lot of guys. He said... The boy's voice broke. He said if he didn't come home, you'd make sure I knew he loved me. The world spun. Sarah felt Jennifer's hand on her arm, steadying her, and realized her knees had almost given out. The tremor in her hands had spread to her whole body now. The PTSD symptoms she kept barely controlled suddenly overwhelming her defenses. I tried to find you, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. After he was gone. I tried so hard. Jennifer's eyes were red-rimmed, her own grief still visible despite the years. I know. I got your messages. I couldn't. I was angry, broken. I took Tommy and ran. Changed everything. Started over. It was wrong, but I was drowning in grief and didn't know how to let anyone in. The ceremony was ending. People were beginning to disperse, heading to their cars, their lives. But Sarah stood rooted to the spot. This boy, Daniel's son, still holding on to her like she was a lifeline, and a promise she'd carried like a stone in her chest for 7 years, suddenly demanding to be fulfilled. Can we talk? Jennifer asked, her voice hesitant. There's so much I need to tell you. So much Tommy needs to hear. Daniel left letters. I've been waiting for the right time, and when Tommy saw the announcement for the ceremony, he insisted we come. He said he had a feeling you'd be here. Sarah looked down at Tommy, saw Daniel in every feature, and felt something shift deep inside her. The guilt she'd carried, the failure she'd worn like a second skin, the conviction that she let Daniel down. It all wavered in the face of this moment. She'd found him, or he'd found her. Either way, the promise was no longer just a ghost haunting her sleepless nights. Yeah, Sarah managed, her voice steadier now despite the tears finally escaping down her cheeks. Yeah, we need to talk. As they walked away from the monument together, Sarah, Tommy, and Jennifer, the clouds overhead began to break, letting thin streams of November sunlight through. Behind them, Daniel Hayes' name remained etched in stone, a permanent reminder of sacrifice. But ahead, Sarah realized, was something she thought impossible. A chance at redemption. A chance to finally fulfill the promise made in blood and fire 7 years ago. A chance to tell Daniel's son the truth. His father had died trying to ensure he'd hear. That he was loved beyond measure, beyond death, beyond time itself. They sat in a small diner off Interstate 5, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and laminated menus offering breakfast all day. Through the window, Sarah could see the parking lot, and beyond it, the endless California traffic flowing north and south. People go about their lives, unaware of the seismic shift happening in this unremarkable corner booth. Tommy sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face, as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away. Jennifer sat beside her son, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. Her expression, a complicated mixture of emotions Sarah couldn't quite read. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a name tag reading Rosa, had taken their order with practiced efficiency, somehow sensing this wasn't a group that wanted small talk. Sarah had ordered coffee, black. Tommy wanted a chocolate milkshake. Jennifer asked for tea. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 7 years of unspoken words, unasked questions, and a grief that had shaped all their lives in different ways. "I should start," Jennifer finally said, setting down her cup. "I owe you an explanation. Multiple explanations, really." Sarah shook her head slightly. "You don't owe me anything. I was trying to keep a promise to a friend." "You were more than that to him," Jennifer said softly. "Daniel's letters, they talked about you constantly. How you kept the unit together. How you never lost your cool under fire. How you made him laugh even in the worst situations." She paused, her voice catching. "How you were there at the end." Tommy's eyes widened slightly, and Sarah realized the boy might not know the full story of how his father died. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on her shoulders. "What did Daniel tell you?" Sarah asked Tommy directly, needing to know what he already knew before she said something that might shatter him. The boy swallowed hard, his young face showing a maturity beyond his years. "He told me he was going to a dangerous place, that he might not come back. He said soldiers sometimes don't, but that it doesn't mean they wanted to leave. He made me promise to be brave, to take care of Mom, and to remember that real heroes don't forget their promises." Tommy's voice wavered, but didn't break. He said if something happened, Sergeant Mitchell would find me and tell me the truth about how he died. Not the version for kids, but the real version, because I deserved to know. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Of course Daniel had said that. He'd always been honest with his son, even about difficult things. It was one of the things she'd admired about him. His refusal to shield Tommy from reality while still maintaining the boy's innocence. "He died saving his unit," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotion roiling inside her. "There was an IED, an improvised explosive device, hidden in the road. Our convoy was moving through a village, and Daniel spotted something. A wire, maybe a disturbed patch of dirt. Something most people would have missed." She met Tommy's eyes, willing him to understand the truth of what she was saying. He called out the warning and pushed our vehicle commander out of the path. The blast still hit us, but because of Daniel, only one vehicle was damaged instead of 3. He saved at least 15 lives that day, Tommy. Maybe more. The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. "Were you there?" "I was in the second vehicle. I saw it happen. I was the medic, so I—" Sarah's voice failed her for a moment. She felt Jennifer's hand suddenly cover hers on the table, a gesture of surprising compassion from a woman who had every reason to resent her. "I got to him as fast as I could. I tried everything I knew, but the injuries were too severe. There was nothing anyone could have done." "Did he say anything?" Tommy's question was barely a whisper. This was it, the moment Sarah had both dreaded and longed for since the day Daniel died. She carried his last words like sacred text, afraid to speak them aloud, afraid she'd somehow get them wrong, diminish them, fail to convey the love and desperation in Daniel's fading voice. "He said to tell you that you were the best thing he ever did with his life," Sarah said, her own tears finally falling freely. "He said he was sorry he couldn't keep his promise to take you fishing in Montana like he'd planned. He said to be good to your mom, because she loved you more than the world. And he said—" Her voice broke completely now. "He said he'd always be watching over you, that love doesn't end just because someone's gone, and that you should live big enough for both of you. The diner had gone quiet around them. Rosa had diplomatically moved to the far end of the counter, giving them privacy. Tommy was crying openly now, but there was something else in his expression, too. Relief, maybe, or a kind of peace that came from finally hearing the words he'd waited years to receive. Jennifer was weeping silently beside her son, and Sarah realized that she needed to hear this, too, that maybe all three of them had been carrying pieces of Daniel's death, incomplete and jagged, and only now were those pieces finally coming together. "Thank you," Jennifer whispered. I never knew exactly what happened. The official report was so clinical, so detached. I needed to hear it from someone who was there, who loved him too. The acknowledgement that Sarah had loved Daniel hung in the air between them. It was true, though not in the way Jennifer might have feared. Sarah had loved him like a brother, a fellow warrior, a kindred spirit who understood what it meant to put service above self. There had never been anything romantic between them. Daniel had been completely devoted to Jennifer and Tommy, even through the divorce. But the bond forged in combat was its own kind of love, deep and unbreakable. "Why did you run?" Sarah asked gently. "After he died, I sent letters to the last address Daniel had given me. I called. I even hired a private investigator, but you'd vanished completely." Jennifer looked down at her hands, shame coloring her features. "I was in a dark place. Daniel and I had divorced 6 months before his deployment. It was my fault. I couldn't handle the constant deployments, the fear, the loneliness. I wanted him to leave the Marines, choose us over the Corps. He couldn't or wouldn't, so I left him." She took a shaky breath. "When he died, the guilt almost destroyed me. I felt like I'd driven him away, like if we'd still been together, maybe he would have made different choices. Maybe he'd still be alive. It was irrational, but grief isn't rational. So you took Tommy and disappeared," Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. "I moved back to my hometown in Oregon, changed back to my maiden name, threw myself into making a life where I didn't have to think about the Marines or the war or what I'd lost. I thought I was protecting Tommy by cutting off that part of our lives completely." Jennifer looked at her son with anguished eyes. "But I was wrong. Tommy needed to know about his father, needed to have connections to that part of his life. I was so caught up in my own pain that I didn't see I was making it worse for him." Tommy reached over and took his mother's hand. "It's okay, Mom. You were hurting. I get it now." The maturity in the 13-year-old's voice was heartbreaking. He'd grown up too fast, shaped by loss and absence, but somehow he'd emerged with compassion intact. Daniel would have been proud. "What changed?" Sarah asked. "Why come here now? Why let him find me?" Jennifer smiled sadly. "Tommy changed. About 6 months ago, he started asking more questions about Daniel. Real questions, not the ones little kids ask. He wanted details, stories, truth. I realized I didn't have enough of those to give him. I'd shut out Daniel's Marine friends, his unit, anyone who could tell Tommy who his father really was beyond just my dad." She squeezed her son's hand. "A friend suggested I join a support group for military widows and divorced spouses of fallen service members. Through that group, I started healing, started accepting that running from Daniel's memory wasn't protecting Tommy. It was stealing from him. One of the women in Mom's group knew someone who served with Dad. Tommy interjected eagerly. She helped us start looking for people from his unit. Your name kept coming up. Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, the medic who tried to save him, the one Dad trusted more than anyone." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the revelation that she'd mattered that much to Daniel, that he'd spoken about her enough that his ex-wife and son knew her name years after his death. "We found out about the ceremony through the Marine Corps Family Services." Jennifer continued. "They send notices about memorial events. When Tommy saw it was in San Diego and that several members of Daniel's old unit would be attending, he insisted we come. He had this conviction that you'd be there. I almost didn't come," Sarah admitted. "I've avoided these things for years. Too many memories, too much pain. But something pulled me there today. Maybe the same thing that pulled you. Dad." Tommy said simply, and Sarah couldn't argue with that. Rose approached carefully, setting down their orders, coffee, milkshake, tea, and retreating just as quickly. The interruption gave him a moment to breathe, to process the emotional intensity of the last half hour. Tommy took a sip of his milkshake, then looked at Sarah with those green eyes so much like his father's. Will you tell me about him? Not just how he died, but how he lived, what he was like over there. Sarah felt something unlock in her chest, a door she kept bolted shut for 7 years creaking open. Yeah, she said, managing a small smile. Yeah, I can do that. And so she began to talk. She told Tommy about how Daniel could make anyone laugh, even in the worst circumstances. How he'd organized a makeshift Thanksgiving dinner in their FOB using MREs and sheer creative willpower. How he was the best shot in the unit and had won every marksmanship competition they'd held. How he carried photos of Tommy everywhere and showed them to anyone who'd look. How he taught Sarah to play poker and then proceeded to lose every single game because he couldn't bluff to save his life. Jennifer listened with tears streaming down her face, and Sarah realized these stories were healing for her too. They reminded her of the man she'd loved, not just a Marine who died, but the whole person, flawed, funny, brave, human. As Sarah talked, she felt something shifting inside her own heart. The guilt that had weighed her down for so long began to feel lighter. She hadn't failed Daniel. She'd tried her absolute best to save him, and though she'd been unable to keep him alive, she was here now, fulfilling the promise she'd made. She was giving his son the connection to his father that he desperately needed. The afternoon sun was slanting to the diner windows when Jennifer finally spoke up. Sarah, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider staying in Tommy's life? Not as a replacement for Daniel, but as someone who knew him, who can share those stories and memories. I think it would mean everything to Tommy. And honestly, it would mean a lot to me too. Sarah looked at Tommy's hopeful face, at Jennifer's cautious optimism, and felt the last of her walls crumble. I'd like that, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I'd like that a lot. Tommy's face broke into a smile, Daniel's smile, and in that moment, Sarah understood that this was what redemption looked like. Not erasing the past or the pain, but transforming it into something new, something that honored the fallen while giving life to those left behind. They exchanged phone numbers and email addresses. Jennifer invited Sarah to visit them in Oregon whenever she could. Tommy asked if Sarah would come to his school's Veterans Day assembly next year and talk about his dad. Sarah agreed to everything, feeling purpose kindling inside her for the first time since she'd taken off her uniform. As they prepared to leave the diner, Tommy hugged Sarah again, and this time she hugged back fiercely, letting herself feel the full weight of the promise she'd finally kept. Thank you for finding us, Tommy whispered. Thank you for being brave enough to find me, Sarah whispered back. Outside, the California sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah watched as Jennifer and Tommy walked to their car, the boy turning back to wave one more time before they drove away. She stood in the parking lot alone, but for the first time in 7 years, she didn't feel lonely. She felt connected to Daniel's memory, to his family, to a future she hadn't dared to imagine. The promise had been kept, and somehow, impossibly, it had set her free. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Sarah received a package at her apartment in San Diego's Gaslamp Quarter. The return address was from Eugene, Oregon, Jennifer and Tommy's home. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried the medium-sized box inside, setting it on her small kitchen table and staring at it for a long moment before finding the courage to open it. Inside, wrapped carefully in bubble wrap, were several items: a folded American flag, a Purple Heart medal in its case, and a stack of letters bound with red ribbon. There was also a handwritten note from Jennifer on cream-colored stationery. Sarah, these belong to Daniel. The flag is from his funeral, the medal they awarded posthumously. I've kept them all these years, but I think some of these things need to be shared now. The letters at the bottom. Daniel wrote them before his last deployment. One is addressed to me, one to Tommy, and one to you. I didn't know the third letter existed until I finally went through all of his personal effects last month. He must have given it to his unit leader to mail if something happened to him, but it somehow ended up back with his belongings instead. Tommy and I have read ours many times now. Yours has remained sealed. I debated whether to send it, whether opening old wounds would be cruel, but Tommy insisted you deserved to read whatever Daniel wanted to say to you. I hope we made the right choice. We're thinking of you. Tommy talks about you constantly. You've given him something precious, a connection to his father he thought he'd lost forever. Thank you for that gift. Jennifer. Sarah's hand shook harder now as she set aside the flag and medal and picked up the stack of letters. The top two had been opened, their edges worn from repeated reading. The third envelope at the bottom remained sealed. Her name was written across the front in Daniel's familiar handwriting. SGT Sarah Mitchell. She made herself a cup of coffee, though her stomach was churning too much to actually drink it. She paced her small apartment, barely 600 square feet, sparsely furnished with second-hand pieces, trying to gather the courage to break that seal and read words from beyond the grave. Finally, as evening shadows crept across her walls, she sat down on her worn couch and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pages, both sides filled with Daniel's neat, compact handwriting. The date at the top was 3 days before the patrol that would take his life. Her eyes blurred with tears before she even began reading. Sarah, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I know you'll blame yourself. That's who you are. You take responsibility for everything and everyone, even when it's not your fault. So I need to say this clearly. Whatever happened to me, it wasn't your fault. You hear me, Mitchell? Not your fault. I've thought a lot about what I want to say in this letter. There's so much, and I don't know how to fit it all into words. But I'm going to try because you deserve to know what your friendship has meant to me. When I first deployed, I was angry. Angry at Jennifer for the divorce. Angry at myself for not being able to choose between my family and the Corps. Angry at the world for being so messed up that wars like this exist. I was carrying so much rage and pain that I was dangerous, not to the enemy, but to myself. I was taking stupid risks, volunteering for the most dangerous patrols, acting like I had nothing to lose. Then you showed up in our unit. This tough-as-nails medic who didn't take crap from anyone, but also had this kindness about you, this ability to see people beyond their rank or their masks. You called me out on my death wish behavior. Do you remember that night in the med tent when I came in with that shrapnel wound I tried to hide? You stitched me up, and then you just looked at me and said, "Whatever you're trying to prove by dying slowly, it's not working. Your son needs you alive, not a hero." That moment changed everything for me. You didn't let me wallow in my pain or glorify my self-destruction. You made me face the truth, that Tommy deserved better than a father who threw his life away because he was too broken to deal with his feelings. After that, you became my anchor. You kept me sane in an insane situation. You made me laugh when everything felt hopeless. You listened when I needed to talk about Tommy, about Jennifer, about all the regrets eating me alive. You never judged me. You just showed up every day, steady and real and honest. Here's what I need you to know. You saved my life, Sarah. Not in a dramatic, stop the bleeding way, though you did that too, more than once. You saved me by giving me a reason to want to live again, by reminding me that I had a son who needed me, that I had a purpose beyond just surviving each day. I made my peace with Jennifer before this deployment. We talked honestly for the first time since the divorce. I apologized for not being the husband she needed. She apologized for the ultimatum that tore us apart. We both admitted we loved each other, but we wanted different lives, and that's okay. She's moving on, and I want her to be happy. But Tommy is the best thing I ever made. My legacy, my reason for existing. Which brings me to the favor I'm about to ask you. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and Tommy is growing up without a father. I can't fix that. I can't undo whatever got me killed. But I can ask you to do something for me. Find him. Find my son. I know Jennifer might make that difficult. She's protective, and she has every right to be. But Tommy needs to know his father. Not the idealized version, not the sanitized story, but the real me. The guy who made mistakes, who loved him perfectly, who tried his best and sometimes failed. The guy who died believing in something bigger than himself. Tell him the stories I told you. Tell him about the time I accidentally insulted the village elder because I got my Pashto phrases mixed up. Tell him about the poker games where I lost every hand. Tell him about the Marines in our unit and how we looked out for each other. Tell him about the good and the bad, because he deserves the whole truth. More than that, though, be there for him, not as a replacement for me. No one could ever replace you being you, but as someone who knew me, who can answer his questions, who can help him understand what service means and why some things are worth dying for. I know I'm asking a lot. I know you've got your own demons to fight, your own battles to survive. But I also know you, Sarah Mitchell. I know that you don't break promises. I know that you'll do everything in your power to honor this request, even if it costs you something. Please don't let it cost too much. Don't let my death destroy you. Don't carry guilt that isn't yours to carry. Live your life. Find happiness. Heal from all of this. But maybe, in the midst of building your own future, make a little space for my son. Help him know his father. There's something else I want you to know. I believe in you. I believe you're going to do amazing things when this war is over. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Not because you don't feel fear or pain, but because you keep going despite it. You're going to save so many more lives, touch so many more people, make such a difference in this world. I won't be there to see it, but I know it's true. Don't hide from your calling because you're afraid of getting hurt again. Don't let what happens to me make you smaller or harder or colder. The world needs a Sarah Mitchell I know, compassionate, brave, fiercely protective of the people she loves. Promise me you'll remember that. I've been thinking about faith a lot out here. I'm not sure what I believe about God or the afterlife or any of that, but I believe in honor. I believe in love that transcends death. I believe that the bonds we forge with each other matter, that they echo beyond our short time on this earth. So if there's anything after this life, I'll be watching over Tommy, and I'll be grateful that someone like you was there to help him navigate a world without me in it. Take care of yourself, Sarah. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for seeing the best of me even when I couldn't see in myself. Thank you for the laughter, the conversations, the moments of humanity in the midst of hell. You once told me that being a medic meant you couldn't save everyone, but you could honor everyone by trying. I want you to know that you honored me. Every day we served together, you honored me with your presence, your friendship, your refusal to let me give up. Live well, Mitchell. Live big. Live enough for both of us. Your friend, always, Daniel. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, her hands clutching the pages so tightly they began to crumple at the edges. She could hear Daniel's voice in every word, could see his face, could feel the weight of his friendship and his faith in her. The guilt she'd been carrying shifted. It didn't disappear. She suspected it never fully would, but it changed shape. Daniel didn't want her to destroy herself with survivor's guilt. He wanted her to live. He wanted her to fulfill his request not out of obligation or penance, but out of love and honor. She thought about Tommy, about the boy who'd run to her at the memorial, who'd recognize her from his father's stories. She'd been given a gift, not just a chance to keep a promise, but the chance to be part of something larger than her own pain, to help raise a good man in honor of a good man, to transform grief into something purposeful. Sarah set the letter down carefully and picked up her phone. She scrolled to Jennifer's number and typed out a message. Thank you for sending the letter. It means more than I can say. I was wondering, would it be okay if I came to visit next month? I'd like to take Tommy to the shooting range, if that's all right with you. Daniel once told me he wanted to teach him to shoot when he was old enough. I thought maybe I could help with that. The response came quickly. Tommy would love that. So would I. You're welcome here anytime, Sarah. You're family now. Family. The word settled into Sarah's chest, warm and unexpected. She thought she'd lost her family. Parents to an accident, her Marine unit to the end of her contract, her sense of belonging to the war that had taken so much. But maybe family wasn't just blood or shared history. Maybe it was also chosen connections, promises kept, love that persisted beyond death. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the San Diego skyline. The city was alive with lights, with movement, with thousands of people living their own stories of loss and hope and everything in between. For the first time since coming home from Afghanistan, Sarah felt like she might actually have a home, not just a place to sleep, but a purpose, a connection, a reason to keep building a life instead of just surviving one. She thought about Daniel's words, live well, Mitchell, live big, live enough for both of us. I'll try, she whispered to the night, to his memory, to the promise she'd made and the promise he'd extracted from her. I'll really try. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. A text from Tommy. Mom said you might visit. Can we go hiking? Dad always said you guys went on really long patrols and that you never got tired. I want to see if I can keep up with a real Marine. Sarah smiled through her tears. You're on, kid. But fair warning, I'm pretty slow these days. You'll probably leave me in the dust. No way. You're a legend. Dad said so. The conversation continued, easy and natural, and Sarah realized something profound. She wasn't just doing this for Daniel anymore. She was doing it for Tommy, for Jennifer, and for herself. She was doing it because connection mattered, because love persisted, because the promises we make to fallen are also promises we make to the living. That night, Sarah slept better than she had in 7 years. She dreamed, but for once, they weren't nightmares of explosions and death. She dreamed of hiking trails and shooting ranges, of a green-eyed boy who carried his father's smile, of a future that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. When she woke, she found herself thinking about Daniel's letter again. The part about her calling, about not hiding from what she was meant to do. She'd been working odd jobs for years, avoiding anything that might trigger her PTSD, running from her identity as a medic and a Marine. But maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to figure out how to use her skills, her training, her hard-won experience to help others. She opened her laptop and began researching programs for veterans, opportunities to volunteer with organizations that serve Gold Star families, ways to train as a civilian paramedic or trauma counselor. The search felt overwhelming at first, but also strangely energizing. Daniel had believed in her. Tommy looked up to her. Jennifer trusted her. Maybe it was time she started believing in herself again. The Purple Heart medal sat on her table, catching the morning light. Sarah picked it up, held it carefully, and made a decision. She would keep it for Tommy, give it to him when he was older, when he could fully understand what it represented. But she would also earn the right to give it to him not as a token of past failure, but as a symbol of present commitment. She would become the person Daniel believed she could be. She would help his son grow into the man Daniel would have been proud of. She would transform her grief into purpose, her guilt into service, her isolation into connection. It wouldn't be easy. Healing never was. But for the first time since the war, Sarah felt ready to try. 15 months had passed since that November day at the Veterans Memorial Park. Sarah stood at the edge of a forest trail in Oregon's Cascade Mountains, her hiking boots planted firmly on the dirt path, watching as Tommy scrambled up a steep incline ahead of her with the boundless energy of a 14-year-old. Come on, Sarah. You're falling behind, he called down to her, grinning. Yeah. Laugh it up, she called back, feigning exhaustion even though she'd barely broken a sweat. The truth was, she could have kept pace with him easily. The years of military training had left her with endurance that civilian life hadn't fully eroded. But she enjoyed letting him win, enjoyed seeing him proud of himself, confident in his growing strength. Jennifer brought up the rear, moving at a more measured pace, her face flushed from the climb, but smiling. Over the past year, Sarah had visited Oregon 6 times, each visit stretching a little longer than the last. What had started as weekend trips had evolved into week-long stays. She'd become woven into the fabric of their lives, attending Tommy's baseball games, helping him with history homework, joining Jennifer for coffee while they talked about everything from parenting to politics to their shared grief over Daniel. The dynamic between the three of them had settled into something comfortable and genuine. Sarah wasn't trying to replace Daniel, and Jennifer wasn't threatened by Sarah's presence. Instead, they'd formed their own kind of family, built on mutual respect, shared memories of a fallen Marine, and genuine affection for each other. You know he's going to hold this over you for weeks, Jennifer said as she reached Sarah's position on the trail. Tommy beating the legendary Sergeant Mitchell in a race up the mountain. Sarah laughed. Let him. The kid deserves to win sometimes. They continued climbing in companionable silence for a while, the Oregon forest thick with Douglas firs and the air sharp with the scent of pine and earth. It was early October, and the leaves on the deciduous trees were just beginning to turn, splashes of gold and red against the evergreen backdrop. Tommy had grown 4 inches in the past year. He'd shot up like a weed, all gangly limbs and adolescent awkwardness. But there was a confidence in him now that hadn't been there when they first met. He asked questions constantly, about his father, about the Marines, about war and peace and everything in between. Sarah answered honestly, never sugarcoating but always age-appropriate, giving him the truth Daniel would have wanted him to have. She'd also begun sharing her own story, not all at once, but in pieces. She'd told Tommy about growing up without siblings, about joining the military to pay for college, and discovering a calling she hadn't expected. She'd talked about the fear that came with being a medic, the weight of responsibility, the impossible choices you sometimes had to make in combat. She'd even shared some of her struggles with PTSD, wanting him to understand that coming home from war wasn't always simple or clean. Tommy had listened to all of it with a seriousness that reminded Sarah so much of Daniel it sometimes took her breath away. He asked thoughtful questions. He didn't judge. He just tried to understand, to build a complete picture of the world his father had inhabited and the woman his father had trusted most. The trail leveled out, opening into a clearing with a stunning view of the valley below. Tommy was already there, standing at the edge, his arms spread wide like he was embracing the whole vista. "This is perfect," he shouted. "Dad would have loved this." Sarah and Jennifer joined him, and for a moment all 3 of them just stood there, taking in the view. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "He would have," Sarah agreed quietly. "Your dad loved the mountains. He talked about taking you camping here. When you were older, tell me about the camping trip he planned," Tommy said, turning to look at her. "You mentioned it once before, but didn't give details." Sarah settled onto a fallen log, and Jennifer and Tommy joined her. This had become their pattern. Sarah sharing stories, filling in the gaps, keeping Daniel's memory alive through the small details that official records and formal condolences never captured. "He had this whole elaborate plan," Sarah began, smiling at the memory. "He'd researched all these trails in Montana, near Glacier National Park. He wanted to take you on a week-long camping trip the summer you turned 12. He'd teach you how to fish, how to identify animal tracks, how to build a proper fire. He bought this expensive camping gear and had it sent to Jennifer's house months before the deployment." Jennifer nodded. "I still have it all in the garage. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure someone taught you those things," Sarah continued, looking at Tommy. "He said a boy should know how to be self-reliant in the wilderness, how to respect nature, how to find peace away from the noise of civilization." Tommy was quiet for a moment, his green eyes distant. "Would you teach me?" "The camping stuff. I mean, we could use his gear. It seems right somehow." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I'd be honored." "Next summer," Jennifer suggested. "A real trip, maybe a week in the Cascades, or we could drive up to Montana, like Daniel planned." "Montana," Tommy said decisively. "That's where he wanted to go. That's where we should go." And just like that, they'd made a plan. Another way to honor Daniel. Another thread connecting past to present, lost to hope. Over the past 15 months, Sarah's life had transformed in ways she never could have anticipated. Fulfilling her promise to Daniel had opened doors she didn't know existed. She'd started volunteer with a nonprofit that supported Gold Star families, using her experience to help other children who'd lost parents in military service. The work was hard emotionally, often triggering her own PTSD symptoms, but it was also deeply meaningful. She'd also returned to school, enrolling in a program to become a licensed paramedic. Her military medical training gave her a head start, but she was learning new skills, updating her knowledge, preparing to serve in a different capacity. She'd realized that being a medic wasn't just what she'd done in the war. It was who she was, helping people, responding to crisis, staying calm under pressure. These were her gifts, and she'd been wasting them out of fear. The nightmares hadn't stopped entirely. She still had days where her hands trembled, where the sound of a car backfiring sent her diving for cover, where the weight of all she'd seen and lost threatened to pull her under. But she'd started therapy through the VA, finally accepting that she couldn't heal alone. She joined a support group for combat veterans, forcing herself to be vulnerable, to share her story, to let others carry some of the weight she'd been shouldering alone. Tommy had been a catalyst for all of this. His need for connection, his hunger for truth about his father, his simple trust in her. It had given Sarah reason to keep fighting when she'd been ready to give up. In trying to honor Daniel's son, she'd discover how to honor herself. "I brought something," Jennifer said, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. She reached into her backpack and withdrew a small wooden box. "I thought today might be a good day to share this." Tommy's eyes widened. "Is that what I think it is?" Jennifer nodded. "Your father's tags. His personal effects from the deployment. I've been holding on to them, waiting for the right moment." She looked at Sarah. "I think having you here makes this the right moment." She opened the box carefully. Inside were Daniel's dog tags, their metal surface worn from years of wear. There was also a wallet-sized photo of Tommy as a young child, its edges creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. A challenge coin from their unit, a small compass, a folded American flag patch, and letters, more letters, these ones addressed to Tommy, one for every birthday from ages 6 to 18. "He wrote these before his last deployment," Jennifer explained, her voice thick with emotion. "Instructions were that I should give you one on each birthday. We've already opened the one for ages 6 through 13. These are the ones still waiting." Tommy reached out with trembling hands and touched a stack of unopened letters. "He wrote to me even though he thought he might not be there?" "Especially because he thought he might not be there," Sarah said gently. "That's the kind of father he was. He wanted to make sure you'd hear from him, no matter what." Jennifer handed Tommy the letter marked age 14. "Open on October 15th. That's next week. Your birthday. But I thought maybe you want to read it here, with both of us, in this place that feels close to him somehow." Tommy took the envelope, his hands shaking slightly. He looked at Sarah. "Will you stay while I read it?" "Of course." He carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a single page covered in Daniel's handwriting. His eyes moved across the words, and Sarah watched his emotions played across his face. Sadness, pride, longing, love. When he finished, he wordlessly handed the letter to Sarah. "Dear Tommy, happy 14th birthday, son. I hope this day finds you healthy, happy, and surrounded by people who love you. I hope you've grown tall, probably taller than me by now. The Hayes men always shoot up around this age. I hope you're doing well in school, making friends, maybe discovering what you're passionate about in life. 14 is a big age. You're not quite a kid anymore, but not quite an adult either. You're in that in-between place where you're figuring out who you want to be. I remember that age well. It's exciting and terrifying at the same time. I want to tell you something important. You don't have to be me. You don't have to join the military or follow my footsteps or live up to some idealized version of your fallen father. You need to be you, whoever that is, whatever that looks like. If you want to be a Marine, I'd be proud. If you want to be an artist or a teacher or a mechanic or anything else, I'd be just as proud. What matters isn't what you do, but why you do it and how you treat people along the way. Here's what I hope for you at 14. I hope you're learning to be honest, even when it's hard. I hope you're developing courage. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear. I hope you're discovering compassion, the ability to see others' pain and want to help. I hope you're finding joy in small things, laughter in dark moments, beauty in unexpected places. I hope your mom is doing well and that you're taking care of her. She loves you more than life itself. Even if we're not together anymore, she was the best part of my life because she gave me you. If Sergeant Mitchell found you like I asked, I hope you're learning from her. She's one of the best people I ever knew. Strong, kind, honest, brave. She'll tell you the truth about me, the good and the bad, and that's what you need. Not a perfect hero, but a real person who tried his best. 14 is also the age where you start making bigger choices. Who your friends are, what your values are, how you spend your time. Choose wisely, son. Surround yourself with people who make you better, who challenge you to grow, who have your back when things get tough. I wish I could be there to see you grow up. I wish I could teach you to drive, help you through your first heartbreak, watch you graduate high school. But life doesn't always give us what we want. What it does give us is a chance to make something meaningful out of what we have. You have your whole life ahead of you, Tommy. Make it count. Make it matter. Live big enough for both of us. I love you more than words can say. Always your father, Daniel Hayes. Sarah folded the letter carefully and handed it back to Tommy, who clutched it to his chest. The three of them sat in silence for a long time, the Oregon mountains stretching out before them, the October sun warm on their faces despite the cool air. He'd be proud of you, Sarah finally said. The person you're becoming, the questions you ask, the kindness you show. Your mom's done an incredible job raising you, and you've done an incredible job of growing up despite losing so much. Tommy wiped his eyes. Do you think he can see us? Somehow. It was the kind of question Sarah usually deflected, uncomfortable with discussions of afterlife and spirituality. But looking at this 14-year-old boy who just wanted to believe his father was still watching over him, she found herself answering differently. I don't know about heaven or ghosts or any of that, she said honestly, but I believe that love doesn't end when someone dies. It continues in the people they touched, the lives they changed, the memories they left behind. In that sense, your dad is absolutely here. He's in your mom's strength. He's in your courage. He's in the promises kept and the stories shared. He's alive in you, Tommy, in the best possible way. Jennifer reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand, a gesture of gratitude and solidarity. They sat together as the afternoon light shifted, three people bound by loss but defined by something stronger, love, honor, and the determination to transform grief into growth. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they made their way back down the trail. Tommy talked about school, about his plans for the future, about a girl he might like but wasn't sure. Jennifer shared news from her job, from the support group, from the life she'd rebuilt piece by piece. And Sarah talked too, sharing her own plans. The paramedic certification she'd complete next spring, the apartment she was thinking of getting in Eugene to be closer to them, the veterans program she'd been asked to help develop. They were building something together, the three of them, not a replacement for what was lost, but something new and precious in its own right. A family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, by promise, by the determination to honor the fallen by living fully. When they reached Jennifer's house as darkness fell, Tommy hugged Sarah tight before heading inside. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for finding us, for staying, for being exactly who Dad said you'd be." Sarah hugged him back. This boy who'd become like a nephew, maybe even like a son. "Thank you for letting me be part of your life. You've given me something I didn't know I was missing." Later, as Sarah drove back to her hotel, she thought about Daniel's words from his letter to her. Live well, Mitchell. Live big. Live enough for both of us. She was trying. God, she was trying. Some days were harder than others. Some nights the memories still drag her under. But she was moving forward, building a life that had meaning and purpose, connections that mattered. She'd kept her promise to Daniel. She'd found his son, shared his stories, become part of Tommy's journey into manhood. But in the process, she'd found something for herself too. Redemption, healing, and a future she'd thought was impossible. The road stretched out before her, illuminated by her headlights, leading toward tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. And for the first time since coming home from war, Sarah felt ready to embrace them all. She'd survived. She'd honored the fallen. And now, finally, she was learning to truly live. Daniel would have been proud.